Hello, everybody. Welcome to San Diego Histcon Live Winter Quarters. I'm Grant Lindenberg from Pushing Cardboard, and I'm delighted to be back at the conference. And this year, my guest, I'm very happy to say, is Grant Dalgliesh. How are you, Grant?
I'm really happy to be here with you, Grant. Grant and Grant. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I know. If anybody has a question, just ask Grant. We'll be happy to help you.
Yeah, it's a twofer.
It's a twofer, yeah. You're on the road right now. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm at Game On. It's a convention in Bellevue, Washington, east of Seattle, and been playing Alliance this morning and yesterday morning, and a couple of other games. I saw some Julius Caesar played, and just also been chatting with people, having a great time. Alliance is going well.
Yeah. How we'll talk about Alliance later, but just quickly, how many? What size of game? That game plays 1 to 7, so it can be. What size of table did you have?
Well, we had basically two of the sort of standardish tables that are about 3 feet by 6 feet, and put them together. So the size of the neoprene double size map that we used is 44 inches by 68. So it's a little less than 4 feet by 6 feet. It fit really well, and we have seen here a game with 7 players using that, and this morning's had just 4 humans, and you still have 7 armies. There are rules for the other empires to move and be buffeted from side to side to side.
Right.
It's just gorgeous on the big map. I've got some pictures. We're going to get those posted pretty soon.
Great. Well, fantastic. We'll get to that as we go. But I've never spoken with you. I've known of your games for years, of course. I'm a Canadian. You're now
also Canadian.
Colombian. Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the history of the company. Your dad founded this company like back in 72, but was it Gamma 2 then, or when did it change to be Columbia?
It was recast as Columbia in 83, I think. The name my father said just felt like a bigger opportunity, a broader name that encompassed more than Gamma 2 had. So I think there's a legal structure change too, partners change, things like that. But my dad is the common element through that whole thing.
Yeah, right. And Columbia is a great name for the Pacific Northwest, both, Washington, British Columbia. Like there's
you got it each way
there. Yeah. So your dad founded the company. Was it just him, or was it him and partners, or how did the whole thing start?
Yeah, there was the 3 guys that worked together on the game. Quebec 1759 are all initial shareholders or partners in the company. My dad and his friends from college, Lance and Steve, and they started it with just like a few $1,000s and a dream, kind of, and more money went in over the years. I know that it was hard to keep afloat, and I think my dad was the only one with the perseverance who just stayed the course.
Right. Well, thinking about that, like that's what 53 years ago now. I was thinking about this the other day. You guys are the longest still standing war game company that I can think of. All the companies that were around when your dad first started, like SBI, Avalon Hill, all those companies are long gone or folded into something else.
Yeah, well, that is just a testament to his staying power and Scottish stubbornness. But it's wonderful, and I can imagine it going quite a while yet. 2025. It's the year I turned 50. It's the year my dad Tom turns 80. It's to me, when I was growing up, the future, like 2000, when we were little, 2000 was like the future, right? And then that came and went, and 2025, it seems a little landmark to me still. So we'll see. I have always optimistic, always have high hopes. Off to a good start for 2025.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and you've basically grown up in the business. Like
Literally
you've had games your whole life and been
whole life.
privy to watching your dad design and I'm sure struggle with design problems along the way. How old were you first got interested in maybe designing yourself or helping develop or whatever your first entry into the business was?
Well, when I was a little guy, I did some assembly work. Like we have our blocks, and we count them or weigh them and put them into like a little formula of the right amount of blocks for the right game, right? And that was a manual process. So that was probably my earliest exposure to it. And we were paid, my friends, and sometimes, I brought friends in sometimes as well, and paid piecework, my dad called it. 25 cents a bag or something.
Right.
And it was great. I loved it. So we would put them in the bags and earn the money, and then go down to the 7-Eleven and get Slurpees and play video games. So that's one way. We did play. As a kid, I played some of the family-oriented games that we had in my dad's line, in our line, I guess. Klondike was a favorite. That I like early. I can remember playing Klondike at 9 or 10 years old.
Slapshot?
Never didn't play that until quite a bit later in my life. It's odd, but it was out of print for a long time, and hard to find. So probably I remember we brought it back in 2010, 2011, something like that. After 25 years, kind of asleep. When I was real little, my dad would he would make games up all the time. Like just we played the game like the dictionary game that most people know, or the categories kind of game.
Yeah.
He adapted a Monopoly game to a horse racing game, where you were jumping over the hotels like a steeplechase. He called it. You're jumping, and if you land on it, then your horse crashes. But if you jump over it, then you're okay. And that was just those things are all formative and important in my childhood. It's later again that I got into the role playing stuff, the hard stuff. Played some of that, generated the characters. That was lots of fun. And then later again, I really became a big fan of East Front. Again, it was way later than it had come out. That was published in '91, and I don't think I played it intensely until quite a few years later. But in '98, '99, 2000, kind of, I remember that period of time. We're going a lot to Origins and Gen Con every year, and I played a lot of those games. Really had a wonderful time. And then that's funny when I say all that, because that's like a whole nother epic in a way. That period of time when we were focused on the World War II games that I can come into detail on that later, but just broadly, the World War II games, the East Front series, and we had Victory as well, and Wizard Kings, and those were the titles, and we were working those titles. And what I'm amazed at is when I think about where I'm at now. We got Hammer of the Scots and Crusader Rex and Richard III, Victory in Europe, and Julius Caesar. My goodness, now Alliance. Some of these titles are very important for us as a company and a family business, but and I didn't have them back then. Makes me sometimes realize just how much goes on. Like, time flies, and yet a lot goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. So at some point you started actually designing and developing with your dad, and
with
your
him.
dad, kind of a giant in the hobby. It, I from the outside, everybody, we might think that always goes smoothly, but I'm thinking about, much as I love my dad, we would butt heads when we were working on the same projects together. Was it the similar?
Oh
thing?
yeah, oh yeah, legendary. Anything you can imagine, from the stereotype. He's Scottish, so I'm half Scottish. I don't know if the Canadian. I'm born in Canada. I'm Canadian by birth. I'm half Scottish, half American, all Canadian. I say sometimes.
Right.
But I don't inherently have that. Like, I'm sorry, kind of want to make peace with. So we have had many legendary battles. But not, it's your dad too. So sometimes he's blur between how the game's going to work and how life is going. And
right.
The real world. So I'm still really glad, on balance. Like, I would never trade what I've gotten to live for anything, because it's been really, really great. But yeah, it's a little tumultuous from time to time. But I don't know. I don't see how you get anything done if you didn't have some passion,
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So when we're debating how to settle on a rule or something, there's some passion in there sometimes, but it's purpose. It's purpose driven, right?
Right. And obviously your dad he's your dad on the one hand, but he's also like the creator of the company, and so he's sort of got a right to think that maybe he knows best, right?
He played that card a few times, of course.
I bet he did.
Of course.
You say,
but that's the one. He could play that card with anybody else, and it would work absolutely solidly. What he could play it with me, and I did have just sort of the little comeback that, yeah, but I'm willing to work with you, and I don't see anybody else lining up. So it was beautiful give and take. I'm blessed that I got to do it. Like, he turns 80 this year, as I mentioned. It's not till August technically, but still going strong. My mom and dad just went to Florida on a weekend. They are involved in boating and sailing as a hobby, and the community around that, the U.S. Power Squadron, it's called. And so they went to Florida for a convention to do with boats, and here I am at a convention on the other side of the country to do with games, and I think it's great. He's trusting me to kind of run the show for him, and I'm honored that I get to do so. And when we think about that,
he was involved in the design of Alliance, your big game,
most recent release, exactly.
There. Yeah. Well, that's cool. I
mean,
I would like to talk about.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I would talk about some of your games then, since
Sure.
I've never spoke to you before, but I was thinking. Well, I have a few slides. I don't have a slide for all your games, but I have a slide for.
That's a good one to start.
Yeah, we'll start there, because this is the game that invented block wargaming, and also I think maybe there was step reduction in maybe Anzio at Avalon Hill, but this game takes step reduction. Instead of just 2 steps, there can be 3 or 4 steps, so that this game brought a whole lot new to the hobby in one package.
Well said. Yeah, 1972. And the picture you're showing there is the new one coming out here, 2025. And it is brand new artwork by Richard Lushek, who is just great. He does all of my board games now, and the role-playing stuff, the Harn stuff. he's just really, really good because he cares. So the perspective is right, the angles are right, the flag is right, everything is right, and yet it's also
Well,
good.
I was gonna put the old one in, but I love this new cover so much that I
Yeah,
decided to go with this because I don't know.
sure.
There's something
All
about
the old
those
ones
red
out there
coats.
on Board Game Geek, you people can see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
But that's
I
gorgeous, isn't
was
it?
thinking about like the first four games. There's this, which kind of opens things wide open, um,
Yeah.
and then there's Napoleon. Well, there's 1812 and Napoleon at Waterloo and Robble in the Desert. I mean, that those are three of those four games, maybe all four, are still played a lot today. I mean, I play a ton
Oh
of.
yeah.
I'm
Oh
maybe
yeah.
the world's worst Rommel in the Desert player, but I play a ton. And
Yeah.
this one, it's not just it's in its fourth edition, and this is one of those cases where it's not simply a reprinting. This game went through several different versions and
Correct.
was licensed to Avalon Hill for one of those versions, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I would kind of describe that one that was licensed to Avalon Hill as the second edition, although it was really, in some ways, the first edition, really the very early one. And there was a third put out around early 90s. And that had a core or a division level order of battle and more blocks than the original edition. And some people liked it and some people didn't. It's interesting. The fourth one, that the picture you're showing there, was from 2013. Went back to the original core level order of battle and big blocks. It's the first edition of that game with the big 1-inch blocks, and they really look sharp.
In
And
my
it's sold
corner of
out
the
too.
world, the second edition or the fourth edition is the one everybody seems to like to play. So
Yeah.
I guess I live in a spot where people like the core size rather than the division size.
I think it's because less is more, and it actually really reminds you of why one of the design philosophies that seems to apply to all the block games. I'll give my dad credit for all of that at the beginning. That when you let the players play, give them tough choices, but less actual things to handle. They have to make those choices, and every one of them really matters. Right? So
Right. That's kind of the signature of Columbia Games is simplicity and elegance. Like I'm always amazed at how much game I get in 8 pages of rules. I mean, we'll go to the next one because this is probably my all-time favorite Columbia game for sure.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've played it a ton, and I'm still terrible at it. But I just keep coming back to it because I don't know. There's so much packed in this game, and it so perfectly gets at the idea of supply lines being critical along the edge of the desert in North Africa in World War II. It's just it's perfect.
it had that, and it had the cards. This is the pioneer of the game with the supply cards and the dummy supply cards, right? I mean, that is so much game. It's you and me locking horns and trying to outwit each other, and sometimes you bluff, and there was nothing like it, right?
In this game, the fog of war, in those, no matter which scenario you're playing, those initial couple of moves where you're feeling each other out, and when you finally have that first battle, and you find out if you were right, whether to go into that battle or not, because you thought your opponent was weaker than you or what have you. That's always so totally exciting.
It is, and it tends to be different, even with the fixed historical setup games. We tend to give you some variation on that, usually a free deployment option to tweak things. I hardly ever use it. Hardly ever see players use it because the Fog of War just makes it work right off the historical setup
Yeah,
rapidly.
I totally agree. And this game was the first one where Craig Besink worked with you guys. And
That's right. So Craig was a fan of Napoleon and also had a passion for in North Africa in World War II, and he put the two together and presented it to my dad, and they worked a little bit of magic together to finish it up. And that was a fruitful relationship because it led to the East Front series, and that's still
yeah,
going. We're
yeah,
gosh,
that,
that's
that's another
1991 that first came out.
one. Yeah. Yeah, I probably should have said your first 5 games were all just like bangers that are still played. I should also say
almost all of them. That's actually a philosophy that maybe it's a little different than most publishers, but we are a little different than most publishers. We're a family business and we are hands-on business. Like even our collaborative games, whether it was with Craig or Jerry Taylor, or recently working with Bruce McFarlane on Alliance, or Justin Thompson. We work, together, but we put a lot into it personally. Myself, my dad, both of us, whichever combination we're talking about, and then we really care about it. And I don't want to let that go after that. That is where I'm with him on the Scottish stubbornness. We try to keep them in print, which that's full circle. That is why Quebec 1759 is coming back. Why it's on Kickstarter right now is because it needs to stay in print. That's the first and foremost reason. The timing, 50 years is it's just perfect. It just sounds cool. Gotta love that. It's also an homage to my dad because I very much want for him to see that this is like a feather in his cap and a completing capstone sort of or something on 50 years or more of greatness. So he's in Florida right now, like I said, but I'm sure he's watching the Kickstarter and he's actively excited about all that. And that's both because of those reasons, but like the original point was it just needs to stay in print. So later this year, I'm going to have to reprinting Napoleon, the one you just showed. 2013, we did that edition, that 4th edition with Fat Napoleon on the front. And 5th edition is coming down sometime later this year. I have no plans to change it, actually. Just it'll get an upgrade, better map, better box. But we kind of got that one right in 2013, I think. So in that case, there'll be a little fanfare, but mostly the intent is just to keep it in print. So I think that's a bit unique. I don't know. There's so many out of print, right?
There's a lot of out of print, and I didn't mean to imply that other of your games. I know they're all still in print. I didn't mean to imply that they're not still played, but it feels like games like East Front and Rommel in the Desert and Napoleon in particular, they've all been reprinted quite a few times. Like for their age,
it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Like 1812 is also a great game, but it hasn't had the reprint cycle that some of the other ones have.
No, indeed, and I'm sure we'll maybe get to that. And I also, it's a measure. Table time is just a term for it. I know the ones that get played are the ones that get played. It's like a snowball effect, right? It's okay, but it's a definitely noticeable. For us, as a business, there's the games that sell stronger than others, and Hammer of the Scots and Julius Caesar are kind of the top two for the last 15, 20 years. But Alliance is doing well here, 2025.
Well, Thinking of that East Front, it seems like you're also a company that likes to build on success, because that game was obviously successful when it came out, so it led to West Front, Med Front, Euro Front, Volga. There was a whole series of those.
Yep, milked it till you couldn't stand it anymore.
Wow, I'm all for it. But
You're on board.
I was looking at the timeline, and then like the next game that came out, I think was Bobby Lee. So it was your first tipping the toe in the American Civil War genre. Yeah. But it was also that was the first time there was a little change to the blocks, to the combat system that time. I think that's the first game where we see the little F1 or F2 or
all right,
where you don't just hit on sixes, you hit on 1 or 2 or 1, 2, 3 or whatever that little F number is.
Sure. Well, I guess the idea of hitting harder than just sixes was probably pioneered in Rommel and also used in East Front in those games.
Yeah. Yes.
But
based on unit type,
Civil War, we were able to kind of refine it one more notch. And actually, it's a combination of things. Like you're kind of alluding to both where these ideas came in, how they developed from other games. If you look at Napoleon has the battle board that is in Bobby Lee. It was the same battle board. The rules on the battle board are slightly different to reflect the period and the combat. But things that work, they still work 20 years later or 40 years later. It's amazing. But yeah, way back then, Bobby Lee, and it was innovative. It's still an innovative game. We reprinted it in 2013, 14, I think. We made it a little bigger map, made it a bit nicer. But we didn't really change it all that much because it was just kind of almost a masterpiece getting out of the gate. It had a wonderful feel. Again, what really works in each of these games that I'm so pleased that my dad figured out what one thing or two things were necessary to make it feel like the period or like experience. And in Bobby Lee, it was the fact that you had headquarters that were representing the Army of the Potomac or Northern Virginia, and there's steps on them, and the steps reflect how many times you can go, and then you're dialing it down, but you can go and go and go until you're kind of pooped, and then you got to rest. You got to build, and that is dynamic in that game, which is interesting. Now, East Front, it's fixed. There's 2 game turns per month, like 2 weeks. And then there's a production phase. In Bobby Lee, it was spread out over a range of time, dynamic, and it represented a quarter of gameplay, like a quarter of a year, and you get this. You just don't quite know if like in the archetypical example, if the South pushes up into the North and they're threatening on Baltimore or Washington or something, but do they have the oomph in terms of both the strength, but also in terms of the movement? Because in that game, as in East Front and Rommel with the cards, but if you don't have the movement, you don't move, which is that all by itself is kind of hard in wargaming, right? Because there's a lot of war games where that isn't really a factor.
No, absolutely.
And if you've never had the experience of being sort of sitting in a situation where you've got soldiers or units that you actually can't command, either because they're cut off or your headquarter died or ran out, it's pretty intense, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
If the other guy doesn't know it yet, that's even better. So, I mean, that. Yeah, but that was back in '93, I think, was Bobby Lee. And
right.
Then Sam
And then,
Grant.
and then in '94, Dixie comes out. Your first go at a collected. I guess it's technically a collectible card game, but you could also buy it in a full box and get like all 150 cards or 250 or what have you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, see, my dad, he survived all these 50 years by staying with the times, right? I mean, it was different world, no computers when he started, hardly, and he taught himself all the things that he needed to go into desktop publishing and staying with the times in a tech sense. But then there's in the industry sense. So in the way back and at the beginning of the company, his passion was to found the historical game company in Quebec in 1812, and the Napoleon game were the fruits of that, and then he had a reality check that maybe you were some caps or limits on how many historical games you could sell, and with some hopefulness, created some other games that were Klondike, The Last Spike, UFO. There's a kind of a bevy of them,
Right.
and then he found that those, in fact, also have a little bit of a wider market, but there is also more competition, difficult to differentiate yourself. The loyalty of wargamers is legendary, and we appreciate it. And to finish the point, a little later, role playing was hot, and so he saw an opportunity with the Harn world. It was brought to his attention, and he said, "All right, I got to publish this because this is going to be hot." And then so the Dixie cards were our answer to the craze of collectible cards, which no one can argue that was crazy, and so we jumped on it and we did it our way.
Does Dixie does it still sell it, or is that still is it a going concern for? Does it still play? I have no idea.
Yeah, if you were to ask like a businessman, does it still sell? He'd probably say just no. No, it really doesn't sell. Once in a while, of course, it actually does sell. I think it probably does get a little bit, not quite enough billing on my website as well. And it's hard to do everything. We've got to run the business. We got to wave the flag. We got so many things to do. Sometimes some of the older games don't get the love that maybe they should, but it's a chicken and egg there too, right? Short answer is no, it doesn't really sell. But there again, I'm not really letting it go per se.
Right.
Maybe that's the Scottish stubbornness, but it's still great.
It's not the overlap with the wargaming audience is there, but there's also like some old grognard type wargamers that are going to go, well, where's the hexes or where's the blocks or like there'll be a little pushback there.
Yeah.
But I was looking and I don't have this one. I've got a lot of these games, but I don't have Sam Grant, which was I guess the next Civil War game. But I was looking at the blocks on that one, and it looked to me like the blocks went back to the old school. Like there was no F1 or anything like that. It looked like it had gone back to the old Quebec 1759, it looked like a bit of a throwback.
No, well, there's infantry in that game still hit on ones and twos, and
maybe it's just not on the blocks.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. Well, there's different design, decisions made every time. I think when Sam Grant came out, Bobby Lee's blocks were also revised at that time. So I think it's just an artistic distinction that, sometimes the information is given on the block. Lately, we've been doing more and more of that. Like Alliance has everything you need on the block.
Right.
Wizard
The more,
Kings really have movement, cost, uh, firepower, and terrain, everything, all covered.
right. I think people, the less they have to look in a rule book or at a player aid,
Oh
the
yeah,
better, right? It keeps their
we
eyes right
haven't.
on the map.
Yeah, we were not looking at that rule book for Alliance, not once. We played the
Right.
game, not once. You don't need to look it
Yeah.
up.
Well, you've got it down. All the things you need to do to keep the eyes on the table by this point, for sure. But I have Pacific Victory, which I've only dabbled with, but like Victory was the next sort of big series, and that's
Yeah,
like
if we're going through it in order, that is 1998, and it is funny how that one works, because Sandbox is the best description for it. I agree. Get to do exactly what you want. Create your army or your navy or your air force to your own specs, and duke it out, right, on a geomorphic maps. That was kind of a big innovation, but all of that went back to a game that my dad and Robin, who was involved in Harn, creator of Harn at the beginning, had created. They called it Power, and it was that game, basically. It did have the logistics component in it, which was really important, that came into Victory, where you really had to maintain not only your ability to produce troops in general, but specifically like Air Force production and naval production and army production. Each of the three branches were tracked separately in the old Power game, and that was in Victory. It was just an advanced set of rules called the logistics rules, which they're kind of integrated. And funny, they're back in Victory second edition, which was 2018, 20 years later. I kind of integrated them right into it because I found it important. I think it's how you get a lot more scenarios. It's how you sort of break down stalemates. Is you can go after the production, if you can cripple the production, and you can get ahead of the guy. That's kind of an important part of it. But yeah, 1998 Victory came out, and it came out well. We had a whole lot of maps and armies, other colored armies, so that you could play with multiple players. And we always did actually have a plan to put out other things, other time periods, and other like just kind of different things you could do on those Victory maps. But being a small family business, we just couldn't do everything. And
right.
when next thing that kind of caught our attention and became a dominant thing was an offshoot of that, right? It was Wizard Kings.
Right. Yeah.
And we called it Fantasy Victory in the development. I mean, we actually did call it that, and debated naming it that. But
and that's basically the same game, but pushed into a fantasy setting.
Yeah, basically, the fantasy setting has a little more theme. The armies of elves and orcs and dwarves and things have all of the things that you'd expect to see out of Tolkien or any other kind of literature, or D&D or Harn for that matter. And wizards. I mean, wizards were cool. They're units in the game. They're blocks, right? But it's they don't fight. They cast spells, and so the spells, there are different ones. Quite a few creative things, but most important kind of spells are just fireballs and things that blow up the other guy.
Right.
And so you got to have your wizard, and but you got to have some other soldiers with him, and it's actually quite a sophisticated war game, Wizard Kings, because you've got stacking limits, hexide limits, supply, production, scarcities. Your wizard to cast spells drains their energy, and you got to spend time kind of buying that back. It's masquerades as a like a bit more friendly game, but actually, I mean, it is kill, 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 right? So it's a war game, and it then spawned its own just blah, like lots of maps, lots of armies, and eventually a reprint in 2007. And then I see you brought Hammer of the Scots up on the board here.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful segue. Because Hammer of the Scots is a lot like Wizard Kings in Scotland.
Right. Oh, is that right? That's interesting.
It really kind of is. There's no wizards per se, of course, but the system that we ended up with there with the was pioneered in Wizard Kings. We call it the ABC system.
Oh, I was going to ask because this was the first game that because I didn't do Wizard Kings, I'd always assumed that Hammer of the Scots brought in the ABC differentiation, but it's one game before.
Yes, I hate to shatter your illusions, but it is true. It was one game before, 2 years before, born out of necessity. Okay, so I'll tell you the story. Right, Victory had evolved in 1998, the sandbox game, and we had evolved this sequence of fire that really worked very well, and it was later implemented in Pacific Victory, which came out in 2000. Another one that we jumped over there, but it had a very ingenious little system where there was a sequence where air units, specifically fighters, would go first, then fighters, then bombers, then probably submarines, then battleships, cruisers, going down the line there, maybe tanks, armor, kind of, and then infantry. An absolute sequence, we would call that. It's written into the rules. You get a little chart. You got to kind of memorize it. It's not hard to memorize, but it is an absolute sequence. Okay, and it's a genius thing because it models the interaction of air, naval, and ground without any rules. Like no complex stuff. It just works. But it had one sort of, top end limit that you can't have too many units or your list gets a little out of control. And we kind of found it. We created a series of expansions for Victory called the Elite Units, and it got it up to about 18 or 20 units types. And you just had to keep shoehorning them into the list. So that we added torpedo bombers and dive bombers and destroyers and different kinds of sort of specialist units within air, naval, and ground. And you had to give them a slot in the sequence. This means you had to think about it. And it actually became a little artificial. It's like, why is a torpedo bomber ahead of a dive bomber, or vice versa? Actually, just an arbitrary decision by us because there wasn't a good reason. So then you get to Wizard Kings and you want to have more units, more kinds of things. Plus, you really want to differentiate them. Like, you want the elves to fight with elves. You want the orcs to fight with orcs. Yeah. And why is an elf faster than an orc or whatever, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So from all of that was born what we call the nested initiative sequence. So Victory's got the absolute initiative sequence, and Victory, Wizard Kings, adapted it into the nested one with the A, the B, the C, and beyond if you need it. And there, now I can kind of have my cake and eat it too, right? I get the sequence. A still reflecting flyers and maybe archers. B is generally reflecting horses, mounted things. C is generally reflecting infantry and things of that nature. And D, real slow stuff. And within that, you can have, many, 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 many unit types. And when you look at Wizard Kings, our second edition of that game, there's well over 100 unit types. So, yeah.
And Wizard Kings, that was your design, that a solo design, or did your dad work on that with you?
Oh, well, solo in terms of my dad and I, I would say, we're almost indistinguishable when we're working together. And he's the in the year 2000, I was still just kind of a kid, really. So the he cast a big shadow for sure. But I would say that was maybe one of the years. Victory and Wizard Kings was some of the period there where I personally became very influential, I think, in the design decisions. Although I remember thinking about how to deal with issues to do with Dixie and Shiloh and Sam Grant in the earlier 90s and things. And I remember trying to work with him on Battle Lust in 92 and lots of things. I mean, we have all kinds of.
Well, it's really interesting that you came up with the ABC thing one game before Hammer of the Scots, because I'm not the only person who thinks that who was under the illusion that Hammer of the Scots was where you brought that in. And perhaps Jerry Taylor's getting some credit that he doesn't quite deserve.
Well, okay, but we'll give Jerry Taylor credit for making sure this game happened and that it combined a bunch of pieces together. It's got the history that we want. It's got the ABC, which is a nice, simple, clean mechanic. It had the cards, and that might have come from Rommel, you could argue if you want, but
they're different. But they're different. It's not just supply now.
Yeah. There's an evolution to this, and when we keep going down the road here, you'll see, with Crusader Rex, the addition of sieges, for example, or sea movement or things, and then some of these things end up iterating. And when you get to Julius Caesar, I find it just fascinating to me that the sea movement mechanic in that game effectively harkens back to War of 1812 from 1973. With lakes in the middle of the map, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and the struggle to keep the ships out on the lakes. And if you own the lake, unopposed, then you can use it as a stepping stone to move infantry across.
Yeah.
And that's how it works in Julius Caesar. It's just the Mediterranean, but it runs up the middle of the board.
Yeah.
You need navies to control it.
Julius Caesar, that was I think of it as in a way one of a piece with Hammer of the Scots, Crusader Rex, Richard III, and then Julius Caesar. I think of those as sort of one little chunk of games. I know Jerry Taylor did the first three, and this was you and Justin Thompson. But this game really feels like a piece with those. But this one, I like all the games, but this one is probably my favorite.
Oh boy, yeah. Really, you sure get a lot of tension for minimal kind of setup, minimal workload. You get a lot of healthy stress, good old-fashioned nail biting. What can I do? How do I make this decision? It's not a lot of decisions, really, right? It's just a couple of small but critical decisions based on not quite knowing.
Yeah, that I was going to say that when I think of the block fog of war thing, this is another game where it's like, oh, it's always just like, does he or doesn't he? I'm always thinking about that when I'm making a move.
Right, and it's very important for making for a game that you're going to want to play again and again and again. And that in the long arc of Columbia Games and the history of the company, that's always been a goal. I can't say we always got it right or 100% right, but we sure try to make games that you're always going to want to play. Like, it doesn't matter. You should not probably tire of most of these games because they're going to be exciting, fresh and new. Like each new game is its own fresh, exciting experience. Um, I have found I'm still playing Julius Caesar, playing right now on Rally the Troops, that awesome
Well,
website.
I wanted to ask you about that because these 4 games happen to be the 4 that you guys have licensed or granted Rally the Troops the opportunity to put up. And I
Rommel's
think
there
it's
too, actually.
What's that?
Rommel's there too, actually.
Oh yes, of course, Rommel. I've played Rommel a ton on that there as well.
It's a great forum. I'm so happy that it exists.
Yeah. Do you find it drives sales at all? Like, is it increasing awareness of titles, do you think?
I choose to believe so. I don't have any metrics that can really measure it, but we're doing well, and people do continue to come into my orbit, and I have to assume it's the word of mouth that comes from experiences like that. I also don't mind either way, whether I can prove it or not. I mentioned earlier the concept of table time. It's the same if it's digital table time. If your attention is in the world of blocks, if your attention is on Columbia games at all, I'm happy, right? I mean, that stands to reason when you really think about it. But to me, it's quite clear that it's a net benefit that it's out there. I'm wholeheartedly supportive of Tor, and I guess the whole community is grateful to him. There's going to be quite soon an Alliance and a Quebec module on Rally the Troops. So look for that. And anybody listening, I'm on there. I'm Grant Stewart Dalgliesh. That's me, and you can come and play me. I love playing. The way it works asynchronously, so cool.
Yeah, it's totally cool. I love it, but I just have to think that if I own Julius Caesar, but if I'm playing somebody who doesn't have a copy, but he's playing it for the first time with me, and he likes it the way I like it, I got to think that's going to inspire him to buy the game for when he's, if he's got people that he plays with live.
I believe it to be true. I think it is. I think so, and I'm going to continue to will it to be so because we're doing okay. The game continues to sell. They're kind of evergreen titles. Is the expression you use, and the support that we can get out of it being played on other channels. Rally the Troops is one. There's the Steam platform as well. All of it is just good. All of it is a wonderful thing for keeping the blocks rolling. If you can roll a block,
I just have
where block don't roll.
A couple more titles that I want to ask you about before I threw them all. But one that I've just been playing recently is Shiloh. So coming back to the Civil War games, and it's I don't think it has the ABC thing, but I think it goes back to the F1, F2.
No, it does. Shiloh has ABC for when you get into the melee. Yeah.
Oh right.
Yeah, but it also has the ranged combat with the artillery from area to area.
Yeah,
kind of a hybrid. If you look at our Civil War games, we've got Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg is a hex system. We got the broader scale Bobby Lee, Sam Grant Civil War at a hex system. We did our Shenandoah game with roads, point-to-point roads, and Shiloh is areas. And they each have their pluses and their minuses, and the decision was always made individually, to try to model or make the most fun, make the best experience that A, models the history, and is B, fun. So Shiloh's intense, right? I mean, it's so a mismatch on day one where the history is we're modeling the history, so we've got a strong Confederate army coming in to kind of sleepy Union encampment, but if they can hold on, it starts turning the other way. It's tight.
Yeah, historically it's a surprise attack, and the Union's just waking up. I love that, the simplicity whereby the Confederate commanders have plenty of juice and can go on that first day, but there's only one or two Union commanders that have any juice in them. That like everybody, all the other commanders at the back are asleep, and you've got to take a couple of turns to spend your precious little replacement points to wake those guys up. It's such a simple mechanic, but it totally models the first day, the opening of the first day especially.
Well, and that's, you've touched on, I think, what I most give my dad credit for. There's just finding a simple way to deal with a kind of a complex thing. And it's not, there's a bag of tricks from system to system, from game to game. There's this evolution of them as they, over the course of these 50 years, things came about, new ways of doing things. But it's more than that. It's more just the particular game, the task at hand. When that task was Shiloh, it was, how do we make this feel like Shiloh? Because believe me, the easy way would have been to take the Gettysburg game that came out in 2004 and put the Shiloh map on top of it and play it. And we did try that. We just weren't getting, it wasn't feeling right. It just wasn't.
Right. I would imagine if you did that, then you'd also need to make some special rules for that first day to keep the Union on the back foot. Whereas the system your dad came up with, instead, there's no rules. There's no special rule. Right. It's just the initial setup makes them on their back foot.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's little subtle things like that. In other games, it's how Napoleon gets 2 group moves and the Prussians get 1 and the Anglo-Dutch get 1. That simple little decision makes all the difference. Or East Front, how most of the Soviet only the Soviet Guards armor and infantry go up to 4. Most of them go up to 3. But all of the German units do, reflecting organization, tactics, doctrine, things like that. That was pioneered early, actually. Quebec has that disparity too, right? The British soldiers in Quebec are 3s and 4s, and the French are 3s and 2s. And so those little things, different steps, different strengths, different mechanics, different starting positions. There's kind of an art to that at the end of the day, because you got to know your history. He reads a lot of history, and then I think he notices things, and he makes sure that he can replicate that experience. He's the one who taught me like how to make sure that the game would storyboard the history. It was actually Jerry Taylor came up with the term storyboard the history. I loved it. But my dad had already taught me the concept before that it needed to be possible that what did happen in history can happen in your game, and that some things that didn't happen can happen that are still plausible, because that is why we play. At the end of the day, if you only could do what happened, what would be the point?
No, that's reading a book.
Yeah. Exactly. So what we're looking for is the what if, and the what might have been, and the blocks do that in a way that is just kind of cleaner than your average situation. I mean, they're just in one little step, really nice.
Well, the other thing about blocks that sometimes gets talked about but not much. They're a joy to handle.
Oh yeah,
like I'm a long time hex counter guy. I love hex. I love counters. That's all great. But there's something about I have this thing. I'd way rather play with blocks than minis. 100% of the time, they just feel better.
Well, they're so nice, and the big ones, like in Quebec, 1 inch diameter blocks are they're just legendary. And you're there, you're like feel like you're a general and commanding your troops and moving them around. Playing Alliance on the great big map, as I was telling you, got a bunch of guys around. It looks like out of just the iconic image from the old days of the generals with the sticks pointing.
With the sticks, yeah.
With the sticks, yeah. You know, I could hand out Alliance.
You guys have put out a lot of maps with the deluxe giant neoprene map option. You've given that option to quite a few games now.
Yeah, it's been just something we stumbled across a little while ago, and all the rage right now. Lots of companies are doing it. I've noticed. It's really quite nice to be able to have that, and bigger. They're also foldable, machine washable, like kind of spill proof. Really great. But at the same time, a little pricey, and you got to have some table room. Great for conventions.
Yeah. Well, I want to one other game before we get to Alliance, and we'll finish on Alliance. But Combat Infantry is a game I don't have by you guys, which I should, because I'm a big World War II tactical guy. But
yeah, man,
thought about like doing tactical with blocks. That's really an interesting idea.
Right. Well, we pioneered what is in Combat Infantry a long time before that, in the Gettysburg game, which I mentioned a little while ago, right? Gettysburg tactical, historical block game, which involved two breakthroughs, if that's the right way to put it, mechanically, that were applied in Combat Infantry like 15 years later. And the first one is they were dealing with combat from ranged, like one hex into another, right? Most games, most block games, you move from one space into another space, and then you fight your enemy. Now, when you get to a tactical level, now you have to introduce the idea of range, and then that means line of sight. There's a package of things that go with that. So in Gettysburg, we sort of pioneered a lot of that stuff. And there was this really neat thing in Gettysburg. The reason I'm saying all this when you're asking about combat infantry is because it does relate that in Gettysburg, in order to shoot your soldiers, like have your soldiers fire, you had to have command. And the command had to be the right guy, your division commander, and he had to be in range. And it was finite. After he activated to give you authorized the shot, he tapped himself down a step. So you only got a couple of shots for the day. Then your corps commander could resupply from his couple of steps, one at a time, which was down the line to the division commanders, who can then authorize these brigades to fire. And it's scarce, and it's reflective a little bit of how it seemed to have been in reality, where you really can't fight all day, just can't be done. Like you got an hour, maybe a couple hours, that's it, and it's just too much. So all of that was modeled into combat infantry with an ingenious little system with the blocks are squads, and the platoon leaders, and then there's battalion leaders, and they all kind of support each other. Like you have to have the right guy in position to order firing or movement, and it worked well at Gettysburg, so we used it again in combat infantry. It's if I had to summarize the whole thing in colloquially, it's like it's my answer to squad leader. It's 8 pages of rules, so I don't know how we did that. I really, when you think about how much is going on, or could be going on, and how squad leader and some, it's a binder full of rules that are all necessary to make it all work, and so combat infantry there's some sacrifice, some decisions were made to simplify, make it clean, make it focus on the part that we wanted to focus on, which was to do with logistics, position, scarcity of energy, I guess, and initiative. Short scenarios that you would have a resolution to in a couple of hours, and you're trying to. It's all about position, like really, very much more even than any of the other block games. It really matters exactly which hex you're in.
Right. So it's a game of maneuver.
Yeah, and yet, like, there's a simplicity to it. What we came up with in that game is your headquarters, which are out there on the board. If we're just playing a sort of a standard, simple 2-player scenario, you against me, you're gonna have like three leaders out there, and I'm gonna have 3 near my soldiers, right? Each one of them, they only have a range of 1 adjacent, and so it's a small little operation, each little platoon, and but the genius is, I'm gonna activate one platoon, and order it to do something, and then you, the other player, the German or the other player, is gonna activate one platoon, and it can be whichever one you want. You got 3, but you're going to activate that one, and then it comes back to me. I'm going to activate a different one. So I'm going to go through all 3 of them. Or sometimes you play a bigger game, like all 6 or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go through all of them. That will reflect a time tick, whether it's like, an hour of time. But we don't actually stipulate how it's going to go down. Like it's dynamic and fluid. That sort of feels a little bit how I was rambling about Bobby Lee earlier in the conversation, and telling you how you never quite know when a month is going to end or when the period's going to end, because you just keep going until you're pooped. It's like that there too in combat infantry. But the decision is intense. Like the order that you choose to activate your guys might make the difference to whether you can break through in an area or not and have the freedom to maneuver. And then at the same time, it models the idea that if these guys have had their turn, they're done. And if you can maneuver around them, congratulations. And it might help. And it's a simplification. All of that we just described allowed us to not have complicated rules. For example, for one of the most poignant things in squad combat is, or tactical combat, is opportunity fire. Like every game has it, but combat infantry doesn't. And it's an interesting point. It's a sacrifice on our part to not put it in. We understand that you're missing something, because it kind of happens in a way, like in a common sense, if something moves, you shoot at it. We understand that. But in a game sense, it's cumbersome and it's not fun to play with. And it's like disjarring usually. And we couldn't come up with a system that we loved. So essentially we threw it out, but it's modeled with this, what I call interleaved command activations where the headquarters, I go, you go, I go, you go. And within that, I'm always thinking about making sure that I have the opportunity to fire at you, because if I do it in the right order, then I will. If I do it maybe in the wrong order, maybe you'll get an advantage. But everybody does get to go. It works out fair, and it's that's a long-winded way of saying that combat infantry is a unique take on tactical combat, where again we've tried really hard to do the Columbia Games, Tom Dalgliesh, magical thing, where we take a complicated topic and synthesize it down into a clean, simple game where it's fun to play. And you're going to learn some history, and even though it's a sandbox game as well, like Victory, in that where armies are somewhat generic Russian, American, or German armies, but the maps are geomorphic and scenarios, and so sandbox. You still learn a great deal about how about tactics and how to move armies, move small unit armies. The range, it's got good systems for dealing with armor for tanks that make tanks immune to small arms. Basically, you got to have the big guns, but it's clean, it's simple, it's just a simple modifier. So wonderful.
The way
I'm really saying that about that game.
The way you describe the interleaved turns totally makes sense to me as a way to model opportunity fire. It's just the way Squad Leader does it is just another way of doing it, but that game is a full I go, you go, but the defensive fire is kind of like an interleaved turn. And one unit defensive fires, it can't defensive fire again. So it's just like your system does that, in that once you use this platoon, they can't fire again. So you can hold them back and hope to defensive fire or opportunity fire. Makes totally sense. It's just as long as people, sometimes gamers think of things too literally. But we always have to remember that games are, on one level or another, they're a model, and sometimes the model is like really precise and literal, and sometimes it's a little more abstract, but they're still models, right?
Oh yeah, if you have to admit it, the more complicated game might model movements on a board that might look like what happened, but they're not necessarily modeling this real reality of the decision making of the commanders, the psychological reality for one thing. So that's a story there that really does nicely illustrate the Columbia Games philosophy. It's, instead of having an opportunity fire set of rules, we blended it into the system subtly and with no rules, and it just works. And again, there are obviously some people who won't be satisfied with that, but if you're frank, nothing would ever satisfy everyone 100%, right? I mean, it's got to be measured at the end of the day by, did you have fun? You want to play again?
Well, I think you might have. I was thinking there's another tactical game that came out a couple of years ago called Last 100 Yards, and that game dispenses with opportunity fire as well. And it also does the thing where it's like if you have initiative, you move a platoon, and then I can react to it, but only after you do your moves. You can't move very far. You only get 2 or 3 movement points. So it breaks up the time quite a bit, but still it's doing the same thing as you, the interleaved movement, and then no opportunity or defensive fire.
Well, yeah, you kind of got to do one or the other in a sense, right? I mean, there may be more choices, but when I'm working on a design, I actually use a flowchart. Good old-fashioned hand-drawn flowchart, and it reveals as you're working on it that you don't have as many choices as you think you have.
Mm.
Because at first you could sit there and you go, I got 100 choices about how to model this situation, like 100, but no, not really. You got probably 5. And then as soon as you choose one of the 5, well, like then that forces some other choices. And when you do it that way, you start to realize where your choices were forced and where you might have some options. And one of the key things that it sometimes reveals is that you might have a choice further back than you realized in your possibly in your entire design structure to tweak something that will have a cascading effect on some subsequent choices, which could be very predictable, possibly. Um, but by doing it that way and thinking of it in those terms, you're open-minded to looking back as well as looking in the present and forward, because I noticed a lot of times, and I don't mean this to sound arrogant in a literal sense. I really don't, but I have received from many people game submissions, um, book submissions, things, right? And a general truism that is no names specific at all, but is it general that people are very attached to the design that they submit and are inclined to believe that it's perfect. No one, I don't think that they're, they themselves are so arrogant that they really truly believe that. Um, and the ones that have ended up working with us to get published are people like Jerry or Craig or Justin who understood that we have to work together, to do the best thing. But that's not so much the point, because that is a personality thing and that's real no matter what. What I'm talking about here, and the segue from the flowchart thing, is a lot of times you get stuck on thinking that your most recent decision is your only decision that you can still tweak, like that.
Right.
Right, but you're stuck. You're not necessarily realizing that you can actually step back a whole layer. Maybe this all abstract, everything I'm describing here, but the point is that it's very powerful to use the chart because it tells you there are less options than you thought there were, and other things um, lead to other things like that are sometimes forced. Like I don't know why it's not escaping me right off the top of my head, but there are certain fundamental dynamics that exist in, like, if you have a stacking limit, then you must deal with that. Or if you have border limits that are or hexide limits to do with terrain when you're accessing, moving from one hex to another, you have a decision to make. If you make them equal to the stacking, for example, then you're favoring the offense. If you make them half of the stacking, which is more typical, like East Front,
Right. Yeah.
then you're favoring the defense. And so you've made some fundamental decisions that you might think are inalterable, but it's delivering an effect. And that's really the point here, is at the end of the day, this is designed for effect. And sometimes people can't quite realize that that's what they did too. They just didn't necessarily know which was effect and which was sort of a result, an accidental result of the effects that they thought they were getting. Anyway, that's a long-winded little circular tale about the evolution of it. It takes some give and some take, and less is more if you can make it work, right? So that's going to be our segue into Alliance.
Yeah.
I think it's a good one, because
absolutely.
that is a less is more situation as well. That the book, the Alliance rules, officially have 12 pages in them, but the back page is an index and a solo rule, and the 3 pages of scenarios account for 9, 10, and 11. So it's your typical Columbia Games 8-page rule book.
Right.
And somehow it models this gigantic war, um, which spans over, 3-4 year scenarios and 7 different countries. It can also cope with one player, which we'll come back and talk about, but 2 players to 7 players dynamically. Like, it doesn't matter. You can sit down with 2, you can sit down with 3, you can sit down with 4 or 7. Wouldn't matter.
Right. And if anybody's hasn't had a look at this at all, this is not like this isn't like Waterloo or a battle game. This is the Napoleonic Wars. This is grand strategic. We're talking, the map is a map of Europe, not a map of a little piece of Belgium.
Indeed, this is a great big strategic game, and I do find the broader the game, the more replay value you actually get out of it. I would say, as a player, because it's going to be different every time. Where you can play Shiloh as the Battle of Shiloh game, and you'll master it after a while. Like, I mean, it's deep, but it isn't quite as deep as sometimes the games with a broader brush, like Julius Caesar Alliance, Liberty is another one. They really will surprise you in how that they work out differently all the time. So I'm very happy with Alliance.
With up to 7 players, or even playing with 4 or 5, that's going to make it different every time too, because the just the possible combinations of the different ways people play is going to throw a different wrench in the works every time.
Every single time, it's different experience right from that. You're kind of how you organize the game, because you can be any of the countries, and then the rest of the countries are non-player empires, which just sort of await some sponsor. You argue about them, sponsor them, get them on your side, and then the other guy tries to get them back out of your side. And it works very well. It's a clean, simple set of rules. The diplomacy rules are like under a page. That's the diplomacy rules for dealing with non-player empires or minor countries. It's a little bit of a system with dice roll that you can't really control it. It's triggered when a leader comes up, and then you got to pay to invest if you want to go after a country, whether it's enemy or neutral. And the other players can all get involved if they want to pay to play, as we phrase it. They do, and if they don't, they just don't. But then everybody who did pay to play gets to roll. There's some modifiers, but something's going to happen. And a lot of the time it's nothing. A lot of the time the country just stays the way it is. But it could be that if it's friendly to your enemy, you have succeeded. You got the high roll in this little example. You drive it into neutrality. And then sometime down the road, you might go after it again. You can also go fight them, conquer them, sit on their capital and drive them into submission. If the diplomacy doesn't work, go with war. But it's a clean, simple set of rules. The order of battle is also pretty manageable. Even the big countries like Russia, Britain and France have 25 blocks each. The smaller guys have about 15.
It's a big
smaller guys too, though.
It's an area movement map for anybody who hasn't seen the map. It's a big area movement map, and the countries are divided not into tiny little pieces. Like I don't know, Austria maybe has 5 or 8 areas in it or something like that. It's like they're big areas in relative terms,
and not very dense either. We only allow you to stack 4 blocks, even in these big areas. So, and it's less if it's mountainous. It's only 2 and things like that. It's got borders between areas that could be rivers, they could be mountains, they could be clear. They control how many blocks you can move across into combat. What's really, I think, the breakthrough that made this game work it came in the cards, and so if we were to use that bag of tricks again, going back to where cards were sort of created originally, maybe in Rommel, but really brought to this next level in Hammer of the Scots. And there was some evolutions throughout the other iterations of games. But here we got 7 players. So we've got cards, 42 cards, 6 of each color. So now there's 7. 7 factions, 6 of each color, 42, right. So those cards drive the game, but rather than kind of complex it up a little bit, we went with a sort of a simple model that every card provides 3 actions. One little nuance is if you are Spain and you play a Spanish card, one of the 42 cards, or 7 of the 42 cards, 6 of them, gosh, then you actually get 1 extra move, or 4 instead of 3. That's it. And so in a way, it's like more harkening back to like a fixed number of moves. Napoleon had that, right? 2 moves for the French, 1 move for each ally. And we tried that. Here we tried different models. We tried cards with varying numbers. But this was just a magical little formula. And so the first thing is the cards are all the same in their effect. But there's 42 unique cards in the absolute sense. And so that is your initiative. And so at the beginning of each game turn, we all play a card face down. Doesn't matter if it's 3 players or 7 players. We all play a card face down. We flip them all over. And the sequence of play for this game turn is the cards working down. So 42 is first. But working down, this player, then that player, then this player. And you always know it. And it doesn't matter if it's 3 or 7, right? It works. That was kind of the breakthrough that allowed us to really make it dynamic, because there were a couple different times in the design of Alliance that we thought about sort of sacrificing that design goal and just making sure it was a good 2-player or 3-player game. Because we do know most of the time it's going to be played that way, so really to get both, make it good at both ends, it was quite a challenge. I think we struggled at it for a long time, and then one day you had a breakthrough, and the cards, that was a big part of it. There's a couple of other important elements that I can recall in the design history. We could talk about it, but we'll come back to it, I think, because the game itself, it's I think we just kind of hit it exactly where we needed to.
I did a quick unboxing video. So if anybody wants to see what it looks like, they can go to my YouTube channel and they'll be able to see the components. But when I saw those cards, like, now you've made it all make sense. I was like, because the cards are numbered 1 to 42, so those numbers obviously weren't ops points like we get in some games,
right?
And then they're the 7 different colors, and I was trying to make sense of what the mechanism was going to be to make sense of these cards. I didn't know if it had to do something with the solo game or what. I think you're right when you said that the game will often be played with 2 to 4 players. But I can really see this game becoming a popular game at conventions.
Yeah.
Conventions seem to be a place where large player count games get played with that otherwise don't get a chance to be played in just when we're just playing with our buddy.
That is exactly true, and I'm seeing it here already. Here where I'm at, Game On, and next weekend I'm going to be in San Francisco at DundraCon. We're going to be playing. The weekend after that, I'm not going, but I've got some people, lots of good people, including Justin. I'm going to be playing at PresCon in Charlottesville, Virginia. And that's just February, man. I mean, we got more down the road. So I'm really happy with that.
Can you tell me about the blocks, about how the combat works? Because I think is the still sort of an ABC system on these blocks, or
It is a ABC ABC 1, 2, 3, the building blocks. I mean, how many cliches can we put in one little sentence? It's plays in a sense just as you would expect. If I say to you ABC 1, 2, 3, you kind of know what that means. A few other things, area movement, as you explained. The cards control the ops, but it's a finite amount, always 3 or maybe 4. But actually, there's gold too, and we got gold chits you would have seen in the unboxing that you earn economically every year for control of cities, and you can use them to supplement your moves, so you can actually go up 3 more if you want, or the other way, save your moves as gold for the future. That was kind of a nice way to cleanly get in economics without a lot of rules. The same victory point, same cities that generate the gold also generate the victory points. They do double duty. So again, there's a lot of less is more stuff going on here. There's just not a lot of rules, not a lot of complicated stuff. It's just let the players play. And I've been watching these games, and they don't stop and go and argue about things. They just keep playing. It's pretty.
I gotta say, the map is gorgeous. For the map for Alliance is gorgeous. It's colorful, but without being like, it's not garish anyway. It's like it's like blue and red, but a little bit muted. So you get the vibrancy of the color, but without it sort of overwhelming the map. I think it's just a gorgeous map. Yeah.
Thank you. And where do you see it when all the blocks on it, right? It's there's, I'm sure you may have seen some pictures of other people playing. It's just great to see. I'll have a wrap up post from this convention, and more great pictures, smiling generals, but while they still just getting started, they still like each other. It's really good. The convention surely shows the strength of it. I do think it's still very good in 2-player format as well, for 2 reasons. Beyond the obvious one, that it's a block game, so it's going to have some replay value just for that reason. But you can also play that with you can play any 2 sides. You don't have to play Britain and France. That's what your first instinct's going to be, and that's fine. But you don't have to. And there's a mechanic in there that balances out the smaller countries so that they still have a chance to win at the end. And everybody wins independently. I mean, there is no coalition winner. The coalitions are just a means to an end. So you can play Turkey or Spain or Austria, and you very well could win. In fact, the handicap modifier is +5. It's quite significant. It really means Britain, France, or Russia have to do quite well to get offset that +5. And that is often, historically at least, accomplished at the expense of those smaller countries, in historical terms. And so it's interesting when you see it played out. I've seen the smaller countries win, like, more often than you might expect. They are the winner in the game, because it is ultimately, the game is set up to start in 1804. You can play. Typically, we play 4 years and call it. Now, that's artificial, always, right? Why did you call it then? Right. That's true in all games, just about, right? Whether it's Waterloo or so many of them. Ironically, Quebec 7059 has probably the best model of all for why it has to end in 16 turns, and that's winter, and it's ice, and you can't argue it. But anyway, that's probably the thing that comes up in these games. The other ones that we just described is the tension right down to the final turn about who's going to win. You see it in Hammer the Scots or Julius Caesar all the time. And you're seeing it in Alliance too, that you don't quite know because a 1 point swing might make a difference. The scores are typically like ranging between 6 and 12 tops, and tighter than that usually, and down to the wire. And so I guess if you're a smaller country, you got that bonus coming. It means mainly you need to stay alive and not get too ambitious. If you're a bigger country, you're going to have to crunch something just to not to be in the winner's circle or on the podium. So it's a neat balance that way. And you can actually play if you want. You and your friend, 2 players, could sit there and play 2 little countries. And the big ones are your pawns that you
right.
And it works just fine. We have a mechanic that we stumbled across that made it work. As I mentioned a little earlier, there is a dice roll system for converting these countries between friendly to neutral to enemy, or the 3-stage cycle. And we were obviously concerned about the possibility that the dice could prove telling. Like you win the game because you got a lucky die roll, you got this country on your side, now you win the game. That doesn't sit well with us. We actually, we roll a lot of dice in block games. The design philosophy is maybe opposite what is initially intuitive, but by rolling a lot of dice, you actually get averages, right?
That's
over
right.
time.
Less fluky results. Or dice.
You get like a localized fluky, like some little battle, something happened, but over time it's going to average out. But when you have the diplomacy, we had situations where a country like Austria, in a 2-player game, you're playing Britain and France archetypically, and Austria is a pawn, and it's going back and forth between these 2 countries in a way. And we just couldn't live with it on a die roll that 4 points were going to change hands. So, I mean, it's just a lucky result of the mechanic, but I remember how I got there. It was that flow chart again, because I recognized my dad and I together gnashing of teeth about all of that stuff. We recognized we kind of had to have a random element to get this to work, or we just weren't getting it. Like we threw it out completely for a while, like completely. That was all just fight. But then it was like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be alliance. So we looked for some way to put that back into the game and control it so that it wasn't out of control. So a couple things. The first one is it only happens when a leader card is played. There are 8 leader cards in that 42 cards. So it doesn't happen every turn. It doesn't happen every time. You don't really know. If both players play a leader card, only the higher leader card gets it. So, you still don't really know. And then you got to pay to be involved. So that's risky. You don't really know. And the result is not as good as you might expect, like superficially, because what we did was the victory points on the board. There's like in Austria, there's 4. There's 2 in Vienna and 1 in what is today Budapest, and another in what is today Prague. And so they add up to 4. And if you're the human player playing Austria, that's what you got, 4. But if you're the British player or the French player, and Austria is a non-player empire, and either they're like converted as a result of the leader-driven, gold-driven, die roll-driven diplomacy, or by force. I don't actually care which way. The points of Austria, the 4 points of Austria, are added up, and they're cut in half before Britain or France gets them. So all points outside of your own country are halved in alliance. And that is a simple thing that magically made it all work, where we could live with the results of the diplomacy being a little bit fluky because its scope isn't that high. It's unlikely to be game breaker. And we got sort of our cake and eating it too. And the flowchart revealed how that was going to all go down because there was just no other way, to get that set of effects with at least in my flowchart, which may have had some limits.
That I never would have guessed that in a million years. It's almost time to wrap up, but the last thing I wanted to ask you about Alliance is you've come up with a new kind of this game can be played solo, but you've come up with from what I understand, a completely different solo system than anything we've seen before.
Yeah, I did, and I stumbled across it. One of those proverbial wake up, jump out of bed, write it down kind of things. We tried the traditional solo Alliance, being with 7 players. We tried the traditional thing where you play one side, and we had it orchestrated as the French, and all of the allies are automatons that approach and advance kind of relentlessly upon Paris, and your job is to stop them. And that actually does work mechanically. It's okay, but it's I've never loved it. I've never really loved the solitaire models where you have to play both sides. With block games, you lose a lot because the feinting and the bluffing is harder to do against yourself. But it never totally satisfied me. It seemed like, okay, that's just something we've just shoehorned on top of the game, so that you can play it solitaire. Now, there have been some innovative solitaire games coming out in the industry lately, right? And so that some of that is what inspired me to keep thinking. And so anyway, I'll tell you what we came up with. It's you set up the game Alliance just like you always set it up, whether you had more players, 1804 or 08 or 12, doesn't matter. You get 16 cards from the deck of 42 at random and make a pile. And then you flip over the top card. And actually, typically now, after setting up the game, I probably would turn all the blocks face down, facing me, so that they're just all face down. Okay, now I'm going to flip over the top card. It's by definition, it's one of the 7 colors, right, that we described earlier. And I am this card. I am this country for this turn. So let's suppose I flip it over and it's a French card. I am France. And I get 3 moves. We don't give you the 4 for being the color match because it's redundant in this case. You just get 3 moves, and you make them independently. So you stand up the French blocks. Right now you can see the French blocks. You make 3 moves, which this is in Alliance. You can use your action points to move or build. You can do that in this, but mostly in the solo version, you just move. And the object is to optimize this move by expanding and conquering a presumably adjacent victory point, or 2 or 3 if you can. So France is, if you're setting up 1804, France is set up in eastern France, right beside Bavaria, and Austria is on the other side. They're kind of, Bavaria is in the middle there, sandwiched between those 2 countries. So if France is the country that flips over the card because of the flip, now I'm going to play France for this turn, and I'm going to move them, and I'm going to attack this Bavaria place. And I might do some other stuff, but let's just focus on this one thing for this moment. And we're going to do it. I'm going to play. We're going to work out the battle. Hopefully, France will win. In this case, it's probably a walkover. The first turn. If you succeed, as you'd expect, now you have a point. You've gained a point, and you write it down. So this is the new part here. You write down a cumulative score. So in turn one, you earned 1 point. Now I'm going to flip over another card. Now, for the example, let's suppose it's the Austrian card, and the Austrians can look around and they can see that the easiest target is the same Bavaria, which the French just took over, but maybe they left only one guy there or something. I don't know. The Austrians look for their target and they attack that place. It looks good. And they win and they drive the French out and they end their turn in Bavaria. Well, that's another point. So even though it's the same point that just changed hands, I'm writing it down twice now in my cumulative score. And if you can, over the course of your 16 turns, do that every time, always gain a point, then you win. And if you don't, well, you lose. Try again. I think players will learn how to get optimal, like maybe they'll get up to 20 points, and I can't wait to see if somebody can do like 32 points, a 2-point average, right? It'd be hard to do. You got uncertainty because you never know what cards. You can't really plan for it much. You could set some stuff up, I suppose. You could. I've seen people try to set stuff up, but then you're waiting until the right card comes. It doesn't necessarily work. Moreover, it's an exercise in making the optimal move every turn. And you don't have to think about all the automaton stuff. You just don't. We don't worry about all that. Could have, of course. I mean, that wouldn't have been impossible to add all of that. But this is a different objective. This is a unique solitaire game specifically purposed for you to compete against, yourself and the engine, but without all the overhead. And if you optimize your turn every time, then you're going to win. It's fun, right? You actually are playing like in a competitive manner against yourself. It's also a shortcut to learning the geography of the whole map and the history or the important points, the choke points, the spots that matter to every country rather quickly, right? In the course of playing one solitaire game for an hour, you're now going to know probably every country's strengths and weaknesses, which would take you 7 games to learn if you tried to do it the old-fashioned way. So I'm really pleased with this. I haven't actually got a lot of feedback yet because the game is still fresh. Most people, when I describe it to them, they think that sounds good. So I still have pretty high hopes. I played it and I really enjoyed it, of course, in the testing. But I'm really excited to hear about it. And I won't go into a long dissertation about it because we are running long here today. But if it works, I can come up with some good stuff for some of these other games. So please give me the feedback.
It sounds like a fantastic way to learn the game, to learn the mechanics of the game. It gets rid of all the strategy of a big, grand strategic game. It's all about just the nuts and bolts, like this idea of optimizing each turn, no matter who you're playing. You play somebody out different each time. That's like really learning how to best move, how to best attack, all that. Like it sounds like if you played this once or twice solo, you'd be ready to go and play it multiplayer and know what you're doing like turn by turn.
I think you'd be a head start for sure.
Well,
this has been so much fun, Grant. We had a great session here. We should do it again.
Yeah, well, I think we should. I'll have you on my podcast proper. But thanks so much. I've really enjoyed kind of going through the history of your company and getting to meet and know you a little bit, Grant. Thanks for being my guest. And this will be, once we're done today, this will be up on my YouTube channel. So anybody who wasn't able to come live today will be able to. In a few days, it'll be posted, and anybody can come in and find out about the history of Columbia games and enjoy the.
Well, and these videos they're like archival for the ages, right? I mean, this will be interesting later too. I can see in the background there, Alliance. Is that Quebec back there too, beside it?
Oh yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, there they are. They made it. So I went to a lot of trouble to get those to you on time, and I'm glad they made it. Quebec, we got to sign off and tell people there's still a couple days left to support the Quebec 1759 Kickstarter that got this whole thing going. It's the whole reason for my whole career. It's right there.
It's so beautiful. And if if people haven't been, if anybody hasn't bought a game from you in a while, it's no longer the pizza box and the sleeve. It's
we're a step
more
up from that
standard box, and the paper is like got almost like a slightly linen feel to it. Like the paper on these boxes feels really great. I know that's a crazy thing to say, but
that's wonderful. No, it's true. We've
sort
got
of
top quality production here.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thanks again. Thanks everybody for hanging out at SD Histcon online, and we'll see you all soon. And I'll see you offline, Grant.
Okay. Thank you.